The following Parkinson's Path podcast is provided by Leanna Marie with All About Parkinson's and Answers for Elders Radio.
And welcome everyone to Answers for Elders Radio Network. And we're here to talk about a very important topic to each and every one of you. No matter what kind of disease you may have, there's a coping process when you're diagnosed with a terminal disease. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about Parkinson's disease. And Parkinson's is a very profound situation because things happen to the brain. You don't necessarily know how to move properly, and it can affect many other types of activities in your life. And sometimes, the symptoms will show up very early before you even realize what's going on, and then you're hit with a diagnosis. And what I'm very excited to do this afternoon is to talk to one of our wonderful experts that are part of Answers for Elders Radio Network, Leanna Marie, who is the CEO of allaboutparkinsons.com. And Leanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Leanna, you have your own story with your mom. And obviously you probably started seeing, the symptoms start to come up and, just learning the coping process of the evolution of her disease. Could you share with us a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah, sure. And I just want to say from the outset, I know a lot of people who listen here, may or may not have Parkinson's. They may have have a family member who's dealing with. But in Parkinson's, those of us who spend all our time in here know it is a chronic illness. Most times we say someone died with Parkinson's. It's a distinction that we often make because people, unlike something like cancer, for example, certain types of cancer where someone is given X amount of weeks or months to live, Parkinson's for most people live quite a long time. And so you learn often over time on how to deal with the various stages as they come along. And I would say that's what happened with us. And my mom was, I guess you could say in quotations, fortunate enough to get a type of Parkinson's that had a very slow progression, and thus she lived with it for 30 years. Not unlike something that we've seen in Michael J. Fox, for example. So we did see, bit by bit, her learning and us learning, people that are around her, caregivers and team. I guess we're all part of a team to help her, learning how to quote unquote cope as we went along. And and I can talk about a lot of different scenarios and how we learned, but I would say just to begin with that it's a process, total process of learning. Trial by fire, if you will. Sometimes you go, oh, so that comes with Parkinson's. I didn't know that. Okay.
But I think the other thing is that you can never count on tomorrow being the same as today.
Absolutely not. That goes with everything, right? But
for the most part, today's as good as it's going to be. And tomorrow there might be a dramatic change, or the approaches that you've been making previously in helping mom or dad or sister or brother or whoever that is. You obviously realize that this isn't working anymore. I have to come up with a new way.
Yeah. Totally. And it is it's exactly like that with Parkinson's, and people who, if they're my family sitting next to me, they'll be shaking their head pause. Yeah. Because Parkinson's is just like that. It is it feels and it looks like it can be totally random. It's not, but it is in the sense that every day you wake up and you're like, okay, so I'm feeling great. My body's moving. Other times you wake up and nothing's moving.
Sure.
And to someone on the outside in particular, it can look like, I probably mentioned this before, where someone could accuse you that you don't look like you have Parkinson's. You don't have anything because you're walking around, you're fine. And in my mom's case, on those days that she was, we were having something, a party celebration of some sort, and she was just on cloud nine, and her tremor would go away, or her, inability to walk. All of a sudden she was able to walk. Like, these things, certainly challenge you in the sense of not knowing what next day is going to be like,
Sure.
what the next hour is going to be like. And so you do have to learn kind of on the fly. All right, so that's a possibility. She could just shut down, i.e., her legs could just stop moving in the middle of a shopping excursion. And so what do we do when that happens, right?
Exactly.
But I will want to say, in terms of coping, I wanted to talk a little bit about just the not just because I spent a lot of time talking about tips and tricks for the physical aspects of, but for the emotional aspect is sort of what I've been writing about in my newer book. And I think that that's really the emotional coping side of things, and how my mom, now in hindsight, I can see how she managed, how she coped. Maybe not while I was in it did I really see what was going on.
Right.
But I wanted to share something that I read recently, and it's actually kind of a little dated, but it was so impactful for me. It was this University of Wisconsin Center for the Study of Pain. And I don't know if you've ever heard this little story, but essentially they did this test where they had volunteers who put their, and it's going to sound very familiar in a second. They put their feet in an ice bucket. And one of the things they learned was these volunteers could keep their feet in the ice bucket twice as long when somebody else was in the room. And the point was that just having the presence of another person with you. So for someone like a care partner, a caregiver, a spouse, you don't have to necessarily know everything about Parkinson's. You don't have to know, and you just need to be there with them. And it helps that person exponentially just by being there. And so that's just something I want to share, because I had read that recently, and I thought, yeah, that's so true.
That is very profound what you said, and I agree with you. And it's also, I think, to a certain degree of understanding that you don't have to do much more than be with someone. And, so many seniors out there that are suffering from various types of illness, says they feel alone in the world and alone with everything on their shoulders. I think the same thing happens with a caregiver. They feel like they're alone and with everything on their shoulders. And for those that are out and, in the outer circle of that, just to show up, just to say, I care about you, just to, be in an area where you can maybe drop in or take them to lunch or send them a bouquet of flowers.
Just something little, right? It doesn't have to be this big thing, right?
Yes.
It did amaze me, not in a positive way, but it kind of maybe surprised me that some close friends of my mom's at the time, and this is, I think, happens with a lot of somebody gets cancer and they just get afraid, they don't know how to deal with it, and so they become distant from their friend. And I think that did a little bit catch me off guard, that some of her friends became distant. And for whatever reason, whether they couldn't cope with it, they didn't have their own mechanisms in place or ability to handle something. But again, maybe they thought that they had to do everything, and all they needed to do was just kind of sit there with my mom or give her a hug, or, nothing really complicated, which is some of the stuff that I'm often saying to people. Well, how did you cope, when you had something bad happen in your life? Like, what did you do? Did you talk to someone? Did you, go exercise? Like, everybody probably has built-in things that they've learned over the years. If they're any age past 25, 30, you've been through some things, presumably. So looking back on that and like, well, what did you do? And how did you manage? Because most people, I think, underestimate themselves in terms of what they can handle and how they can, but like I said, some people, like some friends of my mom, unfortunately bailed, and that's unfortunate, but you got to hang on to those good friends and hang on to the people in your life that can help you. I think that's for me what I did when I was caregiving. was hang on to those really good close friends that
Mhm.
my aunt, who had already been there, done that with my mom, with her dad with Alzheimer's. I think that really helped me cope better. Was
Mhm.
talking to her. That really helps, I think, is like being able to have a heart to heart with somebody who's experienced something you're going through right now when they've already been through it.
Sure.
But yeah, so in general, I think for me, I was just trying to think of some like things that top of mind when I think about people might be having troubles coping. And we talked about this before, and I know we don't have tons of time here, but we talked about it in another podcast about maladaptive versus adaptive behaviors. And I
Mhm.
think when people say, well, is this okay? And I'm like, well, you know, I like to shop. That, like maybe that's my little, like, I go retail therapy, but,
Mhm.
an excess of that may not be so good, or
Right.
gambling, or whatever your thing is,
Right.
right? Y'all talk about like comfort food. Well, that's great too, but, most likely we can't continue to eat all day long. Like we have to understand what is good and what is bad. And I'm
Mhm.
not here to tell you what is or what isn't, but coping in general, I think we can all get through a lot if we have those things in place, like I said earlier, like a team, your support, and hone in on who those people are. And just let them know, like, all I need is I just need a hug, or I just need
Yeah.
be open and honest about what you need,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. And that's the thing I think some often I know with my mom, I had a similar situation that the rest of the family just drifted away and it was me and mom. And so I
Yeah.
totally understand what you're saying. So again, to each and every one of you, Leanna Marie is part of our experts. You can see her on YouTube and also listen to her podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms. And Leanna, how do we reach you?
Well, you go to allaboutparkinsons.com. It's spelt exactly the way it sounds. And all of our resources are on there. The books that we have for people with Parkinson's and for care partners are both on there. And also some free resources for you too. And we also have our Facebook page, All About Parkinson's, and lots of good stuff there too.
Sounds awesome. And guess what, everyone? Leanna and we're going to talk a little bit about focus. How do we focus during a time of chronic illness, specifically with Parkinson's? And we'll be right back in segment 2 right after this.
The preceding Parkinson's Path podcast is provided by Leanna Marie with All About Parkinson's and Answers for Elders Radio. To learn more about Leanna's story, her books, The Parkinson's Wall of Honor, and more, go to allaboutparkinsons.com.